Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, October 22nd, 2024. 2 weeks until Election Day, former President Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee, holds a roundtable in the Miami area with a focus on Latino voters, while Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, tapes 2 interviews with NBC News and Telemundo. Former President Barack Obama campaigns for Kamala Harris in Madison, Wisconsin, with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, the Democratic vice presidential nominee. President Joe Biden goes to Concord, New Hampshire to talk about a new study showing how much senior citizens are saving on prescription drugs because of a law he signed. The FBI says it's investigating the leak of classified documents on Israel's preparation for a potential retaliatory strike on Iran. We'll hear from the Pentagon press secretary. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is in Israel meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about efforts to reach ceasefire and hostage release deals between Israel and Hamas in Gaza and Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen previews new sanctions targeting Russia and its war-making in Ukraine, including, quote, intermediaries in third countries that are supplying Russia with critical inputs for its military. And First Lady Jill Biden unveils a new White House tour experience for visitors, more high-tech and visceral. From Associated Press, both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump promoted economic policy Tuesday as their best chance to win Latino voters, but their approaches are very different. In an interview with Telemundo on Tuesday afternoon, Vice President Harris plans to highlight how her agenda would create more opportunities for Latino men, a strategy born out of roughly a dozen focus groups and polling. The Democratic nominee intends to show off her plans to double the number of registered apprenticeships. She wants to stress how she would remove college degree requirements for certain federal government jobs and encourage private employers to do likewise. And Harris wants to provide forgivable loans worth up to $20,000 each to 1 million small businesses. Former President Donald Trump, the Republican nominee, made his own outreach to Latinos on Tuesday, hosting a roundtable with them in Doral, a Miami suburb, surrounded by elected officials and business leaders who are Latino. Trump touted the economy during his administration, which he argued was better for the Hispanic community than during the Biden administration. That was from AP. And we start with the Donald Trump event at his golf club near Miami and the remarks of Jennifer Korn, executive director of the Hispanic Leadership Network, who worked in the Donald Trump White House when he was in office.
The Latino community loves you, and it was such an honor. It was such an honor to work for you at the White House all 4 years, and I got a front row seat of how much you cared about the Latino community, and you delivered results, and you didn't pander to us. You gave us opportunity, and that's what we want. You know, we want the American dream. My mother was born in Mexico. My dad was born in Brooklyn with very humble means, and they worked very hard and achieved the American dream. So that's how what other country could a little girl from East LA make it to the White House to work for President Trump? And thank you. And that dream is achievable through jobs. And we care, like all Americans, about the number one issue, and that's jobs and the economy.
Jennifer Korn is now executive director of the Hispanic Leadership Network with Donald Trump, Republican presidential nominee, and Latino leaders today in Florida. Donald Trump himself spoke about many issues during the hour-long event. One, immigration and border security.
During their regime, this stupid person that was the border czar, she was made the border czar, now she said she wasn't. She was the border czar for 3.5 years, and now she said now, whether she is or not, she was in charge of the border. That's loud and clear. She never once called the Border Patrol. The Border Patrol, by the way, 5 days ago endorsed me, which is something they're not even really supposed to do. And in endorsing me, they gave it a full-throated endorsement, but in endorsing me, they said how horrible she is. And it's not easy for them to say that. You know, this is the vice president of the country. They work for the country. They said the worst that they've ever seen. And you know, they're great people. They're people that want to do their job. It's easier not to do the job, probably. Just let the people walk right into our country. They want to do the job. They love the country. They're incredible people. I've gotten to know them very well. And they said not one time, the question was asked by the fake news, how many times did she call? Not one call was ever made to any of them by either Biden or Kamala not one call about the border. And I actually think it's the biggest thing. You know, we talk about the economy and we talk about inflation. Let's put them together. But there's something about that border that's just really, really evil. The drugs, the human trafficking, you know, it's not just people pouring through, it's the human trafficking, and they traffic in women mostly. It's mostly women, believe it or not, as much as we talk about the 325,000, but women still have the big edge. They traffic in women and children, and they do it at levels that, by the way, 4 years ago, it's always bad. If you do one person, it's bad. But this is 15 or 16 times the number. Nobody checks. Nobody does anything. You know how you check? You go and open the trunk of a car. That's how they put them mostly in trunks of cars. How would you like to be a woman, a little girl, a little boy, in the trunk of a car? That's how they find them. A lot of times they're dead because of the heat. They drive through. By the time they get to the destination, they open the trunk and they're dead. And this horrible, incompetent person has allowed this to happen and never one time called anybody from the Border Patrol. They work for her and they work for him. And then they complain about a bill. It's a phony deal. It's a scam. There's no bill. I never had a bill. All you have to do as president, wake him up and say, Joe, we need you to say close the border. That's what I did.
That's right.
I just said we're closing the border. He keeps talking about, they keep bringing up a phony bill. The bill was horrible. 2 million people are allowed in. It was a horrible bill, stupid bill.
Donald Trump, Republican presidential nominee, former president, today at his golf club in Doral, Florida, part of a roundtable discussion covering many issues with Latino leaders. CNN reports that Donald Trump will record an interview with Joe Rogan for his podcast on Friday. According to sources familiar with the plans, the interview is expected to take place at Rogan's studio in Austin, Texas. Rogan first launched his podcast in 2009. In the past 3 years, the Joe Rogan Experience has consistently been the #1 podcast across the globe. That was from CNN. Another AP article, Dateline Madison, Wisconsin. In-person early voting kicked off Tuesday across battleground Wisconsin, with former President Barack Obama and Democratic vice presidential nominee Tim Walz hosting a rally in liberal Madison and Republicans holding events to encourage casting a ballot for Donald Trump before Election Day. Trump lost Wisconsin by just under 21,000 votes in 2020, an election that saw unprecedented early and absentee voting due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris are expecting another razor-thin margin in Wisconsin, and both sides are pushing voters to cast their ballots early. That was from AP. We covered this rally. Here is Minnesota Governor Tim Walz in Madison about Donald Trump working at McDonald's in Pennsylvania this past Sunday.
Over the weekend, he made a little appearance over the weekend. You might have seen this. He went to a McDonald's and dressed up as the drive-through worker. They found him an apron his size and put it on him. And I was thinking, it is possible he mixed up his weekends and thought that it was Halloween already. He's been forgetting things lately, as you might have noticed. But look, there's something not just nuts, but cruel about a billionaire using people's livelihood as a political prop. His agenda lets big corporations not pay people for overtime and diminishes those very workers that he was cosplaying as. He missed an opportunity, though. Being at McDonald's, he looks much more like Ronald McDonald than the clown that he actually is. Tell me you don't see this one coming from a mile away. And Ronald wears less makeup. You saw it coming. You saw it coming. That restaurant wasn't even open. It was a stunt. Fake orders for fake customers. They even staged the drive-through. We know that. They won't let you walk through the damn drive-through. We knew that. They saw that happening. But look, everything about this guy is fake. Everything he does is fake. Next, he's going to be telling you he's a cop or a construction worker because he dances to the Village People, so he knows the YMCA. And I'll tell you this, though, that 5 minutes he stood next to the deep fryer, I'll guarantee you that's the hardest that guy's ever worked in his life. And that's not a joke.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, the Democratic vice presidential nominee, today at a rally in Madison, Wisconsin, joining him and also making the argument to vote for the Democratic presidential nominee, Kamala Harris, and not the Republican presidential nominee, Donald Trump, former President Barack Obama.
What he cares about is his ego and his money and his status. He's not thinking about you. He sees power. He sees you as a means to his ends. He wants the middle class to pay the price for another huge tax cut that would mostly help him and his country club buddies. He doesn't care if he costs more women their reproductive freedoms because apparently it doesn't affect his life. Most of all, Donald Trump wants us to think that this country is hopelessly divided between us and them. Now, for him, us means the, quote, real Americans who support him. Anybody who doesn't, they're them. And he employs this strategy like politicians have for millennia, because having people divided and angry boosts his chances of being elected. That's his focus. Is this going to help me, not is it going to help you? And along with those intentions, there's also, as Tim talked about, there are questions about his competence. I mean, he's out there giving 2-hour speeches. It's like Fidel Castro just keeps on talking. It's just word salads. The other day he had a town hall meeting. Now, I've done my share of town hall meetings. My experience is the goal of the town hall meeting is you meet with your constituents, with citizens, with voters, you answer their questions. He decided, no, I'm not going to answer questions anymore. Let's just play music for half an hour. So he's standing there and he's swaying to Ave Maria and YMCA. And, you know, the governor from South Dakota, she's standing there with this weird look on her face like she doesn't really know what's going on. She's like, it's like a hostage video. Can you imagine if Tim did that, or Kamala did that, or I did that? Now, our playlist would be better, but you would say to yourself, this is odd behavior.
Former President Barack Obama campaigning for Kamala Harris in Madison, Wisconsin, joined by Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, the Democratic vice presidential nominee. Story from the Wall Street Journal. Democratic rallygoers will get a glimpse of the real Slim Shady Tuesday night. Eminem, the 52-year-old rapper who grew up in Detroit and still lives in Michigan, will introduce former President Barack Obama tonight at an event in the Motor City. Eminem isn't known for his public appearances, but he has been a vocal critic of former President Donald Trump. That was from the Wall Street Journal. C-SPAN this week is doing an in-depth examination of the 7 battleground states in the presidential election. On our morning program, Washington Journal, joined by political experts from each state. This morning, it was Arizona. And one of the guests, Cameron Sanchez, state politics reporter with KJZZ Radio in Phoenix.
It was going for Republicans in the presidential elections before Trump, like 5 times in a row at least. And then Trump sort of changed the game, or rather things changed along with Trump. So Arizona went for Trump in 2016, but very slightly, more slightly than I think anyone had really expected it to. He didn't have a landslide victory by any means. And Democrats hadn't really previously held a lot of statewide offices. But now, fast forward to 2024, Trump narrowly lost Arizona in his last election. And now we have a Democratic governor, Democratic attorney general, Democratic secretary of state, Democratic mayors in the major cities. And so it's really been a shakeup. And part of that is because we've had a lot of people moving to Arizona. The demographics have shifted, the population has changed. And also, I think the nature of the Republican Party has shifted a lot.
As you mentioned the numbers, it was Joe Biden winning the state 49.4% in 2020, 49.1% for former President Trump. You talked about those demographics. What are things that you were looking at specifically in those demographics that is causing this change, do you think?
Well, it's sort of what you can see with the candidates and who they're targeting. So Latino voters and people coming into Arizona who hadn't lived here before. We have a high rate of people moving in and changing things up. It's something I think the Republicans resent. There's a lot of joking about California transplants, which makes me smile because I'm also a California transplant. So I'm, I guess, a perpetrator of people moving to Arizona. But there's just been a lot of focus on getting those Latino votes and also independent votes here in Arizona, because the shakeup is roughly 1/3 Republican, 1/3 Democrat, and 1/3 independent voters here. So it's almost exactly even.
Would you say that as issues go, immigration is on the top of list for most voters, or are there other things there?
I would say it's in the top three. I would say the top three is probably right now economy, a border, and then also abortion. And abortion has been really the issue for the Democrats. They've been pushing that incredibly hard ever since Roe v. Wade was overturned. And then border was sort of the counterpoint almost for the Republican Party. It's the red meat issue, the one that speaks to the base, the one that's the most popular. And then there's 2 ballot measures this year as well, which are hopefully, depending on which party you're with, going to increase turnout. So there's one on border security and one on abortion. But then the economy is always a top contender, and it's been consistently in the top 3 for the past few years now, especially with inflation. When we've been talking to voters, regardless of political party, economy is always something that people mention.
Cameron Sanchez is a state politics reporter with KJZZ Radio in Phoenix on C-SPAN's Washington Journal program this morning, one of 3 guests we had examining the presidential battleground state of Arizona. And we are looking at the 7 battleground states on the Washington Journal this week, 1 per day. Sunday was Michigan, Monday was Georgia, today was Arizona, and then Wednesday through Saturday will be Wisconsin, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. The Washington Journal is live each morning at 7 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN Radio and C-SPAN Television. C-SPAN's campaign coverage also includes U.S. House and U.S. Senate elections and gubernatorial races. The Valley News in New Hampshire reports today, with 2 weeks until Election Day, it appears to remain a margin of error race between former Republican U.S. Senator Kelly Ayotte and former Democratic Manchester Mayor Joyce Craig in the contest to succeed Republican Governor Chris Sununu in the corner office. Ayotte stands at 42% and Craig at 41% among 600 likely Granite State voters questioned in a UMass Lowell YouGov survey conducted online October 2nd through 10th. That was from the Valley News. Those 2 candidates debated today. It was hosted by the New Hampshire Public Radio and New Hampshire PBS. One of the topics was abortion.
Senator Ayotte, you have said that you will not support any efforts to further restrict abortion rights beyond our current law, which bans most abortions after 24 weeks. Would your support continue the civil and criminal penalties? Do you support keeping that in the current law? And would you add exceptions for rape and incest in our law?
Well, Anne Marie, first of all, I believe that our current law really is a consensus of people in New Hampshire. The Supreme Court returned this issue back to the states. Up to 6 months of pregnancy, a woman can obtain an abortion for any reason, whether that's rape, incest, any reason. I've always supported exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother. In the last 3 months, though, if there's a medical emergency or if, God forbid, there's something wrong with the baby, a woman can still obtain an abortion. Now, obviously, if there are other issues that come up with the law that need to be addressed, of course I'm willing to address them, but I would not allow anything more restrictive in our state. And that's really important. I've said that from day one. The minute I got in a Republican primary, I said that law is what I support and that I would veto any further restrictions.
And would you veto the elimination of the criminal or civil penalties if that reached your desk?
Well, I would have to look at it. I haven't heard that being an issue for physicians in our state, but I do not want anything more restrictive. And if there were any issues with respect to doctors, I would address it.
And just as a follow, as a U.S. Senator, you voted to cut Planned Parenthood's funding for non-abortion care, such as cancer screenings and birth control, and you vowed to do the same as governor, and you've said you would look for alternative providers to provide that kind of care to lower-income Granite Staters. Now, the state has looked for those providers and not found them. So how would it change if you were governor?
Well, in the United States Senate, I had a very strong bipartisan record, and I really focused on women's health issues, whether it was working on expanding access to mammograms when the federal government tried to restrict it with Barbara Mikulski, or on pregnancy discrimination with Senator Shaheen. So I would make sure that we have access on these issues. In fact, the community health centers enhancing their services in the state, other providers, we will make sure that we have a strong network of providing preventative health care for women, and I will increase funding for that. We'll also make sure there's access to contraception. In the Senate, I also introduced legislation to allow for over-the-counter contraception for women.
And Mayor Craig, you have said you're committed to repealing the abortion law, but you're also called for Medicaid to cover abortions and to require private insurers do the same. You know, given the ideological divides on this issue, how do you get that done?
You know, I believe that abortion is health care. And if a woman needs an abortion, she should have access to that health care, no matter if she can afford it or not. New Hampshire is the only state in New England where Medicaid does not cover abortion, and I think that is something that needs to change. We need to be doing everything we can to both protect and expand reproductive health care in New Hampshire. You know, you said it. Kelly Ayotte voted for a national abortion ban, against funding Planned Parenthood, and if she's governor, she would continue to defund Planned Parenthood. She shepherded Neil Gorsuch through the Supreme Court process and then celebrated when Roe v. Wade was overturned. She said it herself when she entered the Republican primary. All of a sudden, her mind changed on this because she knows that this is important to voters in New Hampshire. We cannot trust what she is saying right now. We need to make sure that we have a governor who will protect and expand reproductive health care in New Hampshire, and that is my priority.
Joyce Craig, the Democratic nominee for governor, debating Kelly Ayotte, the Republican nominee, today. Running to succeed Republican Governor Chris Sununu, who is not running again after 8 years in office, 4 two-year terms. More from the Valley News in New Hampshire. In the race for New Hampshire's 4 electoral votes, the poll they did indicated Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee, at 50% support, with GOP standard-bearer, former President Donald Trump, at 41%. The survey is the most recent to point to Harris holding a comfortable margin over Trump in New Hampshire. President Joe Biden traveled to Concord, New Hampshire today to visit a Democratic campaign office. He also had an official presidential item on the itinerary dealing with prescription drug prices. He was joined by Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, at Concord's Community College on a new report from the Health and Human Services Department showing nearly 1.5 million Medicare enrollees saved nearly $1 billion on prescription drugs in the first half of 2024, thanks to the cap on out-of-pocket drug costs put in place by the Inflation Reduction Act. Here's President Biden.
Because of this law, not only could Medicare finally negotiate lower prices, it also capped prescription drug costs for seniors total this year at $3,500 in 2024, and in the next 6 months. And by the way, in the first 6 months of this year alone, at out-of-pocket spending, we saved the people enrolled in Medicare nearly $1 billion in 6 months. $1 billion less out of your pocket nationwide in just the first 6 months. That means as of June, 1.5 million Americans who are enrolled in Medicare hit the cap and do not have to pay a dime more for drugs for the rest of the year, no matter what their costs are. And here, this bill is so extensive, people don't fully understand it. And guess what? Starting this January, the total cap on prescription drug costs for seniors on Medicare will be even lower. It'll go down to $2,000. Not have to pay more than $2,000, no matter what the cost of the drugs are, no matter what. For example, some of you unfortunately know, some of the cancer drugs can cost $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 a year. That's not hyperbole, that's a fact. This change is expected to save 19 million seniors and other people on Medicare, save them, just those ones on Medicare, $7.4 billion out-of-pocket spending starting in January. But here's the deal. It's also going to save the American taxpayers billions of dollars. I'll go into this in a little more detail, but the fact the bill we passed, extensive as it is, guess what? The American taxpayer is going to save $160 billion lowering the deficit. $160 billion. Because they no longer have in Medicare have to pay $400 instead of $35 for insulin, for example. But that's not all. Thanks to the law I signed for seniors are already saving on their prescription drug costs now.
President Joe Biden today in Concord, New Hampshire, joined by Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from neighboring state Vermont, who chairs the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Wall Street today, the Dow down 6, NASDAQ up 33, S&P down 2. From Newsweek, the chief economist for the International Monetary Fund told reporters on Tuesday that the battle against inflation is almost won amid falling inflation data. Pierre-Olivier Gourinchis said that inflation in many countries is now nearing central bank targets. However, he cautioned that while lower interest rates are a relief, efforts to rein in vast government deficits could dampen growth prospects. That was from Newsweek. Here is the head of the research department at the IMF at a news conference in Washington at the opening of the annual meetings of the IMF and World Bank.
Now, let me start with the good news. The battle against inflation is almost won. After peaking at 9.4% year-on-year in the third quarter of 2022, we now project headline inflation will fall to 3.5% by the end of next year. In most countries, inflation is now hovering close to central bank targets. Now, inflation came down while the global economy remained resilient. Growth is projected to hold steady at 3.2% in 2024 and 2025. The United States is expected to cool down, while other advanced economies will rebound. Performance in emerging Asia remains robust, despite a slight downward revision for China to 4.8% in 2024. Low-income countries have seen their growth revised downwards, some of it because of conflicts and climate shocks. Now, the decline in inflation without a global recession is a major achievement. Much of that disinflation can be attributed to the unwinding of the unique combination of supply and demand shocks that caused the inflation in the first place, together with improvements in labor supply due to immigration in many advanced countries. But monetary policy played a decisive role, keeping inflation expectations anchored. Now, despite the good news on inflation, risks are now tilted to the downside. These downside risks include an escalation in regional conflicts, especially in the Middle East, which could pose serious risks for commodity markets. Policy shifts toward undesirable trade and industrial policies could also significantly lower output. A sharp reduction in migration into advanced economies, which can unwind some of the supply gains that helped ease inflation in recent quarters. This could trigger an abrupt tightening of global financial conditions that would further depress output. And together, these represent about 1.6% of global output in 2026.
Pierre-Olivier Gourinchis is chief economist for the International Monetary Fund, a news conference today in Washington at the opening of the annual meeting of the IMF and World Bank. Washington Today continues in a moment.
This election night, C-SPAN delivers something different. Not just the presidential race, but the state races that will decide the balance of power in Congress. No political pundits, no spin, no commercials. Just the candidates. the results, and you. Follow C-SPAN this election night, Tuesday, November 5th, on TV, online, or on the free C-SPAN Now video app.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. Story from the Washington Post. The FBI announced Tuesday that it is investigating an alleged leak of highly classified U.S. intelligence documents days after assessments containing information about Israel's potential plans for a retaliatory attack on Iran were published on an Iran-linked Telegram account. The FBI said in a statement, the FBI is investigating the alleged leak of classified documents and working closely with our partners in the Department of Defense and intelligence community. As this is an ongoing investigation, we have no further comment. That was from the Washington Post. The Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder addressed it during his news conference today at the Pentagon. Questions coming from AP reporter Lita Baldor.
Can you say whether or not the Secretary has had any discussions with his counterpart or any other Israeli leaders on this leak and to sort of fill them in on what the U.S., at least as of now, thinks happened? And has the Pentagon or the military taken any steps at this point to either determine if there are other leaks out there or to sort of stop or prevent anything additional from going out? And I have one follow-up.
Okay. So just to confirm, you're asking whether or not the department has been in contact with the Israelis?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, we have, but I'm just not going to be able to get into private discussions on that. And then, I'm sorry, the second part?
Can you say if it was actually the Secretary that spoke with
the Secretary has spoken with his counterpart, but again, I'm just not able to get into details on that.
Okay. And the second part was, can you talk about any steps that the department has taken either to shut down any possible additional leaks or locate where this came from?
Yeah, look, I mean, again, as you heard earlier today, the FBI is investigating the alleged leak of classified documents and working closely with the Department of Defense and the intelligence community on this. The investigation is in its first few days, so it's important to let that investigation run its course. As it relates to the safety or the safeguarding of sensitive information, that is, of course, something that we take incredibly seriously here at the Department of Defense, and will continue to do so. But as it relates to this particular allegation, as I'm sure you can appreciate, because it's under investigation, I'm just not going to be able to offer any more comment. And you said you had a follow-up?
I have one quick follow-up. There's obviously been one Defense Department employee who has been named on social media. Can you say whether or not that person or anyone else has had either their security clearance limited or anything as a result of this investigation so far?
Yeah, again, as I just highlighted, this investigation is in its first few days, and it's important to let the investigation run its course. To my knowledge, this official is not a subject of interest, and the department remains fully committed to supporting the investigation, and I'll just leave it there.
The Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, Air Force Major General, being questioned by AP reporter Lita Baldor. A story in the Jerusalem Post about that Pentagon official reads, the Pentagon has reportedly named Chief of Staff of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Henri Tabatabai, as the prime suspect for the alleged leak of classified documents. Sky News Arabia reported on Tuesday, citing a senior Pentagon official. Tabatabai, an American of Iranian origin, is also an officer in U.S. Naval Intelligence. U.S. Senator Marco Rubio, Republican of Florida, Intelligence Committee Vice Chair, and Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas, spoke about the leak in a Fox News interview on Monday. They were at a Get Out the Vote rally in Florida, so you will hear the audience in the back cheering occasionally.
It's both a federal crime to leak that information. It's also an act of treason. It's an aiding an enemy of the United States, a government in Iran that basically says death to America, death to Israel every week. It's their slogan. So one of the important reasons why we need to have a majority is if we are in the majority, I guarantee you we will be investigating not just that, but other strategic leaks that have been designed to undermine American foreign policy and in many cases to help avowed enemies of the United States. That needs to stop. That needs to end. We need to know who did this and they need to be punished.
Yeah, I mean, and an enthusiastic response from the crowd there. Senator
Tom Cotton, there's a lot of speculation about where this might be coming from. And in the past, there have been some strategic leaks of information to Iran. And both parties sort of have their ways of dealing with Iran quite differently. What is your take on what happened here? And how dangerous is it really?
Well, Martha, without confirming or denying the information that was in this leak, we shouldn't be surprised that we've seen from this administration more than a year's worth of leaks hostile to Israel. From the very top to the very bottom, they're packed with people who are hostile to Israel and sympathetic to Iran and its terror networks. From Kamala Harris, who puts more pressure on Israel than she does on Iran, or her own national security advisor, who associates with known Iranian influence agents in the administration, at the State Department, at the Pentagon. So we've seen this pattern for a year. After this election, though, it's going to stop. It starts right here in Florida with re-electing Rick Scott, but also electing a Republican majority and electing President Trump, because we will back Israel to the hilt and we'll make sure that Israel wins. Yeah.
Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas, and Senator Marco Rubio, Republican of Florida, at a campaign rally in Florida on Monday. And a Fox News interview done from there. Sitting beside them was Senator Rick Scott, Republican of Florida, who's running for re-election. Story from the New York Times. Secretary of State Anthony J. Blinken pressed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel on Tuesday to capitalize on the killing of the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar and end the war in the Gaza Strip, a State Department spokesman said. On his 11th trip to the Middle East since the conflict began a little more than a year ago, Mr. Blinken met with Mr. Netanyahu for 2.5 hours, making the case that with the death of Mr. Sinwar, Israel should seize the opportunity by securing the release of all hostages and ending the conflict in Gaza in a way that provides lasting security for Israelis and Palestinians alike, the spokesman, Matthew Miller, said in a statement. Mr. Netanyahu agreed that the killing of Mr. Sinwar may positively impact the release of the hostages, the achievement of all the war's goals, and the day after the war, his office said in a statement about the meeting. But the statement also said Mr. Netanyahu had emphasized the need to fight Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran, and did not mention a truce. That was from the New York Times. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken later met with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog in Tel Aviv, and the two spoke to the media. President Herzog begins.
Mr. Secretary, it's a great honor to have you with us. You're a great friend. I want to thank the administration for its support of the state of Israel in so many fields. I want to thank the administration for the new TAD system, which has been installed in Israel. We are, of course, ready and operating in various fronts, serving a great cause for the free world. In respect to Gaza, I was moved to see, Mr. Secretary, that you've met with the families of the hostages. It is the highest plight in this crisis, in this war, and we know that there is a unique opportunity that following the killing of Sinwar and the other circumstances that have evolved, there is a unique opportunity to make a special effort to employ all tools necessary and possible to move forward and bring the hostages back home. As for the northern front, we are in a different situation. There we've been constantly attacked for a year already, and definitely in the last few weeks, constantly attacked from Lebanon, and that is why we have to take all the steps possible to eradicate the capabilities of Hezbollah, to move forward in preventing their onslaught against the citizens of Israel and the cities and towns. Their attacks with drones, missiles, rockets, their attack on the private home of the Prime Minister, it's all part of a major campaign, which at the end of it all is led and commanded in Tehran, and that is why, of course, a major answer has to be made towards Tehran. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and welcome to Israel.
Well, Mr. President, thank you very much. It's always so good to be with you, to get your insight, to get your perspective, and I look forward to the conversation that we're about to have. We had a series of important meetings today with Prime Minister Netanyahu, with Defense Minister Gallant, Chief of Staff Halevi, and as the President just said, I had the opportunity again to meet with the families of our hostages. And each and every time, it only reinforces what so many families in the United States and Israel and other countries have to live with every single day with their loved ones held in captivity. I believe very much that the death of Sinwar does create an important opportunity to bring the hostages home, to bring the war to an end, and to ensure Israel's security. And that's exactly what our conversations today focused on with our Israeli colleagues, including arrangements for the period following the end of the conflict. It's a conversation that I'll pursue in the region with other partners. But as the President said, this is, and we have to make sure that this is, a moment of opportunity to move forward. And that's the focus of all the conversations we're having here. We'll have an opportunity, I think, to speak more tomorrow at some point, as well as throughout the rest of this trip. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Secretary of State Anthony Blinken in Tel Aviv with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog. Back in Washington, the State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel at his news conference talked about aid to Gaza.
Did the Secretary get any commitments from the Israeli government today that they would increase humanitarian aid to northern Gaza after the letter last week?
The Secretary in his readout, which I know you all saw, was pretty clear in his readout that there are still many things and many progress markers that we need to see as it relates to the flow of humanitarian aid. I don't have any specific commitments to outline beyond what was in the readout.
I asked because the Israelis don't make any mention of it in their own readout of that meeting.
Well, look, I'm not a spokesperson for them. I'm a spokesperson for the U.S. government, and it is something that the Secretary has placed significant emphasis on, both in the letter from earlier in the month, the letter from April, but also the consistency at which the Secretary has raised humanitarian aid. And the Secretary made very clear that there are continued areas where we need to see market improvement.
State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel at his news conference in Washington. From Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, this article, the United States is set to announce new sanctions as early as next week aimed at curbing Russia's Ukraine war efforts. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said on October 22nd the sanctions will target secondary entities in countries that are supplying Russia with critical items used by its military. Yellen told world financial leaders gathered in Washington for the annual meetings of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. That was the article from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. After Secretary Yellen mentioned the sanctions in her opening statement at the news conference, a reporter asked a follow-up.
David Lutter with Reuters. Secretary, good morning. Wonder if you could talk a little bit about the Russian sanctions that the U.S. is preparing to unveil as early as next week. This would be sanctions on third country intermediaries that are facilitating transactions to aid Russia's war effort. Can you describe what these are? You've long warned that financial institutions would face sanctions if they aid Russia's war effort under new authorities. Can we expect some banks in China or other countries to be hit?
So I'm not prepared to spell out the details of the actions that we'll take likely next week, other than to say that our approach has been to identify either Russian or third country entities and individuals who are working to help Russia acquire the materials that it needs for its military activities in Ukraine. And you should expect that some entities of that sort, such intermediaries, will be designated. And as you mentioned, we've also significantly in recent months strengthened our sanctions so that we can now designate and sanction financial institutions in third countries that we see working to facilitate payments that Russia makes to purchase the goods it's acquiring for military purposes. And we've already seen that this threat of secondary sanctions on financial institutions, which would mean that those institutions would be cut off from the U.S. financial system if they deal with sanctioned entities, we're seeing that already is having a significant effect. So further actions of that type remain high on our radar screen as well.
The Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, a news conference in Washington at the opening of the IMF World Bank annual meeting. From the independent newspaper, South Korea is weighing the possibility of directly supplying weapons to Ukraine as mounting evidence suggests that North Korean soldiers are preparing to assist Russia in its war. This is Washington Today. President Joe Biden begins an AP article on Monday honored acclaimed filmmakers, singers, writers, and others who have made their mark on American culture, awarding the prestigious National Medals of Arts and National Humanities medals to 39 recipients. Filmmakers Steven Spielberg, Spike Lee, and Ken Burns, and singers Missy Elliott and Queen Latifah were among 20 recipients of National Medals of Arts, while the 19 recipients of National Humanities medals included playwright, screenwriter Aaron Sorkin and historian John Meacham. 3 of the medals were awarded posthumously. The late singer Selena Quintanilla and artist Ruth Asawa are arts medals winners, and the late chef author Anthony Bourdain was among the humanities medals winners. That was from Associated Press. Here is President Biden at the ceremony from Monday.
The artist's gift is a sixth sense to imagine something no one else can carve, paint, write, sing, dance, or film until they set the vision free. You know, our vision of our nation's North Star, the idea that we're all created equal and deserve to be treated equally throughout our lives. We're the most unique nation in the world. We're the only nation founded on an idea, not a joke, an idea. All others are geography and other ethnicities. But we we've never walked away from the idea that all of us are created equal and deserve to be treated that way throughout our lives. While we've never fully lived up to this idea, we've never walked away from it either. Away from it either because of you. I mean it sincerely, because of you, the people in this room, all of you who we honor in person today, and those whose spirits are with us.
President Joe Biden Monday night at the White House, a ceremony for the 39 recipients of the National Medals of Arts and National Humanities medals for 2022 and 23. For both medals, there are advisory boards at the National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities making recommendations to the president from nominations solicited from the public. The president makes the final selections. First Lady Jill Biden on Monday unveiled an upgraded White House tour experience for visitors, what she called a reimagined tour with more to touch, hear, and see up close. She talked about it in the White House Rose Garden.
Now, you can do all the things that you always wanted to do in a museum. We've made replicas so that you can feel the features of some of the sculptures' faces and touch the shining fabric on the furniture of the Blue Room. You can now hear President Roosevelt's fireside chats in the room in which he recorded them. So you can feel as if you are there right beside him. We've added screens and information so you can read about what you see in each of the rooms for you visual learners. So one of my favorite parts of this new tour is walking past those glowing pictures in the colonnade, going around the corner and coming to that model of the White House on the wall. It changes every couple seconds so that you can see the renovations that have taken place over the years. You may not know this, but the White House didn't always have running water or electricity. So they had to open up the walls to put it in. And that's what you'll learn on this tour. The rendering tells you that story. Who added each piece of the house and when? Serving as your First Lady has been an honor. Being able to bring friends into the house is special. We're doing it today, sharing it with all of you.
First Lady Jill Biden in the White House Rose Garden on Monday. More than 10,000 visitors tour the White House each week. The The White House Historical Association Visitors Center is about a block from the White House and has a new exhibit titled The People's House, a White House Experience. It includes a 1.5 scale replica of the White House South facade, a full-scale replica of the Oval Office, and digital recreation of White House rooms where visitors can sit in on cabinet meetings and state dinners. On Wednesday night, C-SPAN will tour that exhibit with the White House Historical Association president. You can watch live on C-SPAN television, follow anywhere on the C-SPAN Now mobile app or cspan.org. We'll also open up the phone lines, get your reaction. That's live Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for listening to Washington Today. Please subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and we'll send you the stories making headlines in Washington each day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.